at the analysis and findings in that paper. That paper is called Tech That Liberates, a new vision for embedding AI in public service reform. And I'm absolutely delighted that the lead author of that report is here with us tonight. That is Sophia Knight. Sophia is a senior tech policy researcher here at Demos. I'm delighted we've got a great panel to discuss these questions as well. To Sophia's left, joining on the screen, because he has important votes to attend to, is Dan Aldridge. Dan is the MP for Weston-super-Mare and co-chair of the Digital Inclusion APPG, and we will forgive you if a bell rings and you have to run off to vote, because we don't want you getting kicked out of the party. It's very, very fair. And thank you for accommodating us tonight and joining. I know it's going to be a very busy evening down in Parliament. To Dan's left, we have Gina Neff. Gina is Executive Director of the Minderoo Centre for Technology and Democracy and Professor of Responsible AI at Queen Mary University of London. To Gina's left, we're joined by Hetan Shah. Hetan is the Chief Executive of the British Academy and Chair of Our World in Data. How's this going to work? We're going to hear opening remarks from Sophia about her forthcoming, unreleased, very exciting report. We're going to get responses from the panel. I'm going to put a couple of questions to the panelists, and then we'll open it up. And there'll be plenty of time for questions, so get your thinking caps on. So that's enough from me. Sophia, do you want to talk us through your new paper?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ben, for the lovely introduction, and lovely to see so many familiar faces here today, and some new ones. So yeah, I'm going to kind of walk through why we're here, what the paper is about. I think there's some kind of obvious reasons why kind of AI and public service kind of is so on the agenda at the moment. We've got a new government, A, and B, public services are in an absolute state, as diagnosed very well by Ben. And there's kind of two spheres of political momentum kind of going on at the moment that aren't really talking to each other necessarily, or kind of building from each other. So we've got this kind of public service reform agenda, kind of looking at relational public services, things like Ben's liberated public services, which is a lot about the kind of local level and really kind of thinking through on the ground problems, and kind of a systemic fix. And then we've got a kind of, again, sometimes justified excitement about AI, the potential, this feeling of we could totally overhaul the state and how our kind of government functions through digital services. And we do think there's a lot of potential there. And there's a lot of reports out, and yeah, on this kind of topic of AI and public services. But we think then these two groups aren't really talking to each other, and it means we're kind of missing some of the fundamentals, like what is the purpose of public services, and how does AI actually support some of those goals, or undermine them potentially. So it's about really thinking that through, and that's what we've tried to do in this paper. So as Demos, we've got this kind of area of research on public service reform. We've got the Future Public Services Task Force, which is publishing very soon. And this community, this network, Public Services 2030 Network, where we've been doing a lot of leading work in this area for quite a long time. We've also got Demos Digital, recently rebranded, where we have this kind of socio-technical perspective, including particularly on AI. So bringing these two things together, headline kind of takeaway from the report, there are specific AI applications and kind of surrounding digital infrastructure that has the potential to be really useful in helping public services. There's kind of resource management, kind of backroom efficiency. A lot has been spoken about on this. But AI isn't the reform in itself. And that's what we really wanted to get across. There's other reforms that need to happen first. The problems with public services aren't just a matter of inadequate technology. It goes a lot deeper than that. And throwing technology on top of a broken system, it's going to be a very expensive sticking plaster, and we've still got to fix the problems that are there. So some of these problems, give you a quick rundown just to kind of shape the discussion. This kind of command and control, very top-down model is something we've identified as a real problem with how public services currently operate. And that's thinking about these kind of very narrow targets. So things like reducing A&E waiting times. That's a really great thing to get, but it doesn't necessarily get you a better outcome overall. So thinking, how do you actually improve people's health in their communities, in their lives, across multiple areas? Thinking about micromanagement. So you've got what we'll kind of come to later today, a very demoralised workforce. A lot of people are quitting the public service workforce, and their skills aren't really being utilised in the way they could be if there was a more flexible, empowered approach to how that workforce is managed. And finally, citizens are kind of being treated in this carrot and stick way. They're not being partnered with as people who have the power to solve their own circumstances and have a kind of voice in shaping how public services work and serve them best. And the kind of result of this is we have a system of public services that can't handle the complex challenges that we're facing. If you think about an issue like child poverty, that touches across so many different areas of services, educational outcomes, housing, health, all these different services operating in silos, not able to band together and really address the underlying problem. And that's kind of what the point of liberated public services is. So it builds a lot on kind of innovations we've seen around the country. This is happening. There is change going on as we speak. And it's about really highlighting when you get that flexibility and autonomy for public service professionals to address local needs, when you have central government supporting, taking a strategic role and sharing learning and best practice where there is innovation, and when you get citizens' communities partnering with service providers, then you see better outcomes. And where we think digital and AI fits in is as a part of this vision, but it's not a substitute for serious renewal. And there's outcomes that can be really helpful if we're thinking about. There's a really good example of Community Solutions Initiative in Barking and Dagenham, and this was a place where they first reformed the services, so they started taking a more preventative approach to public services on the ground, and then they integrated in, joined up council data sets, things across social care, housing, applied things like predictive modelling, which is one of the applications of AI, and then used that information to empower multi-agency teams to do proactive outreach to people at risk. And this was used during the COVID-19 pandemic to support people who were really at risk, identify them, and get them help faster than central government could. So this is kind of this is an illustration of what we're trying to say here. It's like, you put data and AI in the service of the professionals who use their judgment and are empowered to act on that, to work together with citizens. And that requires a lot of steps to get there. There's a lot that needs to be done on data connectivity and access. So the National Data Library is a big topic of discussion. We still don't quite know what that's going to look like, but we'd really love to see that about joining up public sector data for public benefit primarily. There's also a kind of debate over digital identity. I know some colleagues in the room who are working on this. And kind of how does this fit with digital inclusion agendas? How is this going to work? There's a lot of kind of discussions that need to happen in the public, together with the public, to figure out and build trust in this. Because if we're going to have digital public services, we need to think about how people are able to access that and how that doesn't compound existing barriers. Finally, we're thinking about how to make sure there's access to appropriate AI tools, so procurement guidance for local authorities, how we're reforming procurement to ensure that works the best it can, but also supporting the development of public interest AI. So thinking about research and development funding, how can we really be making sure the applications exist for the benefit of the public first? And finally, I've talked for a while, so I'll just wrap up. Technological innovation isn't an end in and of itself. It's part of a wider socio-technical system, and we need to get the underlying system working. That's the fundamentals. And technology can be aligned with the goals we want to achieve, but we need to understand what those goals are. We need to articulate them, and that needs to come first. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Very well deserved. Thank you. There's a lot in there that we will unpack across the evening. Daniel, do you want to take over? Give us your thoughts on Sophia's provocation there.
So helpfully, I come from this world, so I don't really need any convincing of any of it. So preaching to the converted here. But one of the things that is, having spent a long time on that side, trying to get time with MPs, with ministers, to convince them of all of these things, and now being on this side, I realise quite how is. There's a number of factors, one of which is time, one of which is capacity. But there's a huge issue, and I knew this from before, but about the disconnect between technologists, public policy, professionals, academics, civil servants, and policymakers, as in parliamentarians. Under the previous government, I think trust had been eroded between those groups, and I think there was definitely a sense of a top-down approach, a kind of diktat approach, and I think that the opportunity that we have now is huge. And the new Labour government will make mistakes in certain areas, and certain things won't necessarily be exactly what we want, but there is a real opportunity to align some of those things that you've been talking about just there. I mean, one of the things that I'm doing practically at the moment is to work with my new intake colleagues, and there's about 50 of us at the moment that are linking in what we're calling a parliamentary Labour Party tech network. The idea is that we are fulfilling a need that was there before, to upskill MPs and some in the House of Lords who are interested in this area or have a background in this area, to be able to know what the critical issues are, where to ask for help as well, because that is the big question, is those organisations that have the slickest PR operation, that have the most funding, that are most able to gain access, are often the ones that get the access. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's just and what I would like to do is create a different platform within the Parliamentary Labour Party to be able to have those conversations, so people feel comfortable in challenging that and finding those trusted people. So that includes many of the people in that room, and obviously yourselves as well. I raised the issue of the EU AI Act, for example, in the Northern Ireland Select Committee the other day, much to no one else in that Select Committee kind of could see the need for it, but this just underlines the ubiquity of AI and the potential for its impact. So there's that side, which is the upskilling of MPs, and I think in some ways you can only do that from the inside. There is, and it's something that we're having to do, so we're working on a programme of activity to bring people in to have those conversations. The other side of it is that this government, if we think about Peter Kyle in particular and his language around statecraft and partnership between state and industry, that language just that really resonates with me, is this idea that we can co-curate. We want competition, but we also want collaboration, and we don't want so much competition that collaboration is suppressed, and I think that is where we've been before. So, and with the new kind of the new reforms, if we think about the New Deal for working people, we have to continue to pressure our MPs, of which I am one, to have that in those debates, in those conversations, and in those rooms about why AI, which is a nebulous concept to the vast majority of MPs, let's be frank, is relevant to this. Because what decisions we make today when we're talking about implementing new legislation that has wide-reaching implications and long-term implications, we're talking about fixing the foundations, right? We've got to make sure that's built in. I am really encouraged by the collaboration we see between Department for Health and Social Care and DCIT and DWP and others, but there is still work to do.
Cool. I was just getting texts about volume and how we might address it in the room, so sorry for losing my attention there. No, you're a little bit quiet, for which we apologise. We are working on it as we speak. Thank you, Daniel. Lots to chew over there. Gina, whenever you're ready. Thank you. These are for the online audience. That's why we're using them.
Fabulous. And I assume mine is working, and
For the online
someone will
audience.
tell
Yeah,
Ben, give Ben
yeah.
a furious text.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. And first, let me thank Sophia, Ben, and Elizabeth for what is truly a thrilling report. I'm going to sell it a little bit for everybody in the room. There's so many things to commend this report. One, it tackles I think most critically and importantly, the challenge that is ahead for the UK government, which is how do you do public sector reform? And how do you get public services right? Rather than having the tail wag the dog of how do we sprinkle some AI fairy dust over the problem and poof, magically bring in American style efficiency that will, just somehow magically make these problems disappear. So I have 3 points I want to make, and they will really amplify, I think, how Sophia kicked us off. As a sociologist, as a social scientist of organizations and technologies, I get really geeky and excited. I nerd out when people are excited about socio-technical approaches to technology adoption, right? This is my wheelhouse. I may not actually know that much about public sector reform and a liberated public sector in the UK, but that bit I do know. And the one thing that I know, and I will say to any audience that will listen to me go on and on and on, which I won't do tonight, is technology adoption takes work. It takes serious work. And one of the things that has given me pause in our conversation since July has been that this work of what it's going to take for public sector tech adoption has been undersold. So thinking about Dan's colleagues, in Parliament, the AI in and of itself is not the issue. The issue is how do we get the best for the most efficient services that we can. AI has to play a part of that job, but it can't be the job that we do. Otherwise, we're simply turning contracts over to very large companies that are excited to have large-scale procurement coming out of the UK. So that's what this report does. It basically says, here are some points and opportunities where that work can happen. It can happen locally, it can happen decentralized, and here are cases where that work is already beginning. The second thing that I think it really bears stressing is that tech adoption takes innovation. And this is not a straightforward point for people because we think of the shiny new thing, the AI shiny new thing, as being the innovation. But the work of deployment and adoption is in and of itself, it takes work on the ground to make it sensible. And that is something, again, that's been missing from this debate. How is that work going to get done? Who is doing that work? How are we making sure that it's done fairly and responsibly? So the novel innovation of figuring out how to use these tools, how to use them within the job, and how to make sure we've got localized safeguards and guardrails around them, that takes work of experts, professionals who are in post right now. So when we hear these conversations, again, about sprinkling, I can say this because I'm a dual citizen, sprinkling the American fairy dust over the British problem, that completely negates the sheer amount of innovation on the ground that it takes to get systems that move forward. And maybe you can ask me about how I know this from large-scale building construction, having spent almost 2 decades now studying automation and construction, which we can talk about. The third and final is that tech adoption always has values. And here's what I think this report gets really right. So to what end are we going through the really hard work and asking people to do the extra work of innovating for adoption of AI in public services? And that end has to be for a set of values. Values in the public sector, hate to break it to you, they are different than values in the private sector. We can talk about sprinkling the AI fairy dust over the problems that we have today as solving efficiency, but efficiency is just one of many values that we might be tapping into to be able to drive adoption and a values-led adoption. So for the public sector, especially in the UK, we absolutely need to be asking the questions, to what end, for what benefit? And that's, again, what I think Sophia, Elizabeth, and Ben have done really well in this report. They've underscored that. Let me just very briefly underscore two other things. First, in this notion of socio-technical, for some of you, many of you in the room are experts in tech. I don't need to explain the term, but let me underscore something that I think is so important there. Because if you're taking a socio-technical approach to the adoption of technology for public services, you are absolutely doing something that is joined up in AI safety and AI assurance and trustworthiness. If you are not taking a socio-technical approach, you are not. And so therefore, this kind of a call that this report does that says we need to be really careful about how our existing workforce understands and uses these tools is in effect empowering a workforce, calling for empowering a workforce that can help make sure these systems work fairly and for public benefit. And then finally, I would hope that this report helps us shift the conversation around the adoption of tech. We absolutely need to go down that path. We absolutely need, calls for better data, calls for national data library. We absolutely need better empowerment at the local level, but we need to shift the conversation away from the sprinkling of the fairy dust, the AI fairy dust over the problem. And I think that in this report, we have a metaphor for what we can be talking about in the UK economy at large. And so that's one of the reasons why I want you all, the moment they hit, they hit the button to publish it online, you should cease networking and drinking wine with us. And those of you on the online, you should immediately download and read this very short 29-page report.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you very much. Hetan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. One lesson is never be last to speak on a panel, and in particular, never follow Gina, I think. Gina and I were having lunch with Nick Clegg last week, and there's lots of things he wouldn't want us to repeat from that lunch, but I think he wouldn't mind me saying this. I asked him, what would he have done if he had become UK Prime Minister? And he said that I would be focused heavily on AI adoption in public services. And he said, because you'd get a first mover advantage from it. And this really left me scratching my head. What's the first mover advantage that you get from AI adoption? I don't understand it. And in many ways, one of my questions and concerns is the technology ready yet to be adopted, and what's the right way of doing that? So I think all of your points about adoption are really, really important. And looking at politicians, lots of people in politics talk about AI, and my conclusion is that for most of them, it is a way of signalling modernity. And that is the best way of understanding what is happening politically. And I'd be interested, Dan, in your take on that. But and that's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. But they're not AI experts, and why would they be? But it's the thing that shows that you're up for kind of change and you're modern and so on. Now, I wrote a piece in the New Statesman a few weeks ago and criticising some of these more kind of hubristic approaches to technology. But one of the things I was saying in there is if we can use that rhetoric of modernity and AI to slip in the changes that are really necessary to fix the plumbing around data, around IT, then so be it. And you have my blessings as politicians to do that, as it were. The question is, do they understand that that's the kind of prize? And again, that's why this is a great paper, because it does show there is a kind of much bigger picture and story of things that need fixing, as it were. And I slightly worry that the tech bros themselves don't understand that, and don't understand the complexity of how these systems play out, as it were. And quite an interesting example is those of you who follow the Royal Society's Book Prize, which was awarded a couple of weeks ago, was for a book exploring the concept of life on Mars. And as you'll all know, Elon Musk is very, very keen on this idea. And this book was written by a woman who said she was quite a fan of the idea until she started researching it in depth, and then realized that there is no way of women having children on Mars, and that this was one of the sort of things that was slightly overlooked by Elon in his thinking. So, just imagine that played out across public services, and you get the picture. I mean, there are several things that kind of are on my mind. Are the products ready for market, which is what I was talking about before? And if you look in the commercial world, we're still seeing not that much return yet. Now, it may just be that there's a lag. I mean, that the kind of the sort of the LLMs and so on are kind of, there's enormous progress happening there, but they've just not translated it. But let's see, and let's wait for those plugins to turn up. And in the meantime, I suppose this comes back to your procurement point, which I think is very important. How far can we shape the market for the things that we need, as against having the tools shape the market that we'll get locked into? So the more we can be clear about the ends that we want, the more we can pull the technology towards that. And for example, procurement from the NHS is a really powerful potential tool. It's a big old market. We have the data, let's use that. And in that process, I think test and evaluation is really key, right? I mean, we all hear about hallucinations. It's quite hard from the press to know, like, is this one example amongst a billion? Because the press is still going to cover it, isn't it? Or is it one in every 20,000? We're still not absolutely clear if this is a feature or a bug, right? And we need high quality evaluations. Some of you will have a very clear view, but there'll be somebody else with the opposite clear views, which is why I'm saying that we're not absolutely sure yet. So can we build in, but we need to do this in a kind of efficient way. Again, if you think in the kind of NHS context, what you're finding, like, local trusts are all making their own evaluations of tools. Does there need to be a clear central evaluation function, which then says, this one's met the threshold, all of you fill your boots, as it were? And then let's turn to governance and accountability, which has been touched on a little bit. But I mean, 2 words, post office, sort of that kind of covers it in a sense. But the current framings of safety are really quite narrowly drawn, and we need to be thinking much more widely in terms of trustworthiness. Where are the independent, well-resourced regulators? This was the weakness in the government's white paper, the previous white paper, which feels like it's kind of rolled forward. I was broadly a fan of the approach that they took, a series of sort of thoughtful principles, a sectoral approach. But what was left out of that was they said, well, let the individual regulators take care of it. Well, they've got no new resource for the most part. Who's the regulator in education that you think is looking after all of this? Ofsted? Not sure, really.
Who's the regulator at work?
Yeah. But coming back to your point about kind of public service design, the real value, and I mean, this is definitely the thought in the commercial world as well, is you need to change the workflow to get the most out of AI. So actually, if we can have that conversation, how can we use this new tech, which we're still all kind of getting to grips with, where it will work, where it will add value, to actually change the workflow? And you can get citizen voice into that, so that the workflow isn't actually, it's not, nor is it for the professionals, it's actually for the beneficiaries. That's, I think, the critical thing. And part of that conversation will be, which are the services which are merely transactional and therefore we just wish to automate away? Which are the ones which are relational? And if you datafy, you'll actually miss the really important bit. So, you're going to the doctors, you talk about one thing, but it's just at the end where you say, and there's just this other thing I want, So, look, a final thought. I mean, there's a side effect in all of this, which is that certainly in health, we've seen tech has improved efficiency, but it's also increased demand. And sometimes from the wrong people, the rise of the worried well and so on. So, it's a complex system where we're introducing complex technology into complex systems, and to predict that we know all the right answers is fanciful. But I think the more we can be thoughtful and have conversations like this, and again, it's a great paper, and hopefully will lead to lots of useful conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Hetan. That was really... I'll grab this. I'm going to abuse the privileges of the chair and ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then we'll open up for questions. So, as I said, get those thinking caps on. Dan, I'm going to ask you a politics question, as you're the politician on the panel, to pick up from Hetan's point there about the sprinkling of AI fairy dust approach being so attractive to politicians because it signals modernity. I kind of got 2 questions. One, do you kind of agree that that's part of it, or do you think there are other attractions? And relatedly, how might those putting across what is, fair to say, a kind of more nuanced approach on these matters, how might we win over politicians who might be attracted to the simple quick fix? So do you think it's a modernity thing that's attracting politicians to the quick fixes on AI, and how might we be able to build support for a slightly more nuanced approach? Not the easiest two questions, but over to you.
No, it's fine. I'll try and follow it with some sort of coherent thought. I've just seen that wind-ups have begun, so I just need to be to
Absolutely, that's fine. That's fine.
But the key thing I think is that a lot of us, I have great sympathy with my fellow panelists in the way that we present information in a rational way, and in a way that this should work if we do this, and this. What I have become more aware of over the past 4 months, and in particular, actually, I suppose, in the past couple of weeks since the results of the American election, in some ways, is that metrics can improve. You can improve an economy, you can do certain things, but if people don't feel it, and people don't feel the impact of what you're doing, and you don't communicate it effectively, you lose that battle, then you're out of office, and certain things have happened. I wouldn't like to suggest that there are certain challenges. Well, there are certain challenges coming up that the UK has to grapple with as a partner with the US, especially on things like artificial intelligence. But the lesson that I have taken to heart with this is that any of the moves we make towards artificial intelligence have to be delivered with a clear communications plan and an education and skills plan. And it goes back to some of the things when I was head of policy and public affairs at the Chartered Institute for IT. We talked till we were blue in the face about professional, accountable, ethical standards for IT professionals. That really is hugely fundamental in a system where trust is broken down so much. We need to find ways of demonstrating independent, professional, accountable, ethical behaviour of people. I think we have to start looking at how we do that, and some of that might be around critical national infrastructure, core public services, putting those things in place, and trying to be slightly innovative in that space, because without that, I think people aren't going to see it. But it comes back to the politics of it is different, and I'm still grappling with that as a policy wonk at heart, who is almost cosplaying as a politician. I feel, what I want to do and what my instincts are. Sorry, Adam has texted me to say don't lean forward because it looks like I'm eating the panel.
Wow.
There's so much that we need to do on the communication side, and then that goes into the skills and education side as well. The curriculum reform at DFE, that's essential. All of these things are essential, but it will take a bit of time for us to rethink what a Labour government's vision on artificial intelligence might be. I think we're getting there with the statecraft narrative.
Yeah.
There's still work to be done.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Sophia, do you have any thoughts on how we might persuade politicians of a slightly more enlightened approach on these matters?
Yeah, I mean, I also have the instinct that Dan says to be a bit policy wonkish and get in the kind of details of things. And I feel like one of the kind of lessons of this moment, I think, is you can have your kind of, I think, what do they call it? Deliverism. This, like, you can deliver, you can have this technocratic fix and approach, but if you don't articulate the values, if you don't have a kind of conversation about that, I don't think you can actually communicate your message effectively. I think it's not enough to just kind of make the policy argument. You've got to make the emotional argument. And I think a lot of policy wonk types are a bit afraid of that. They think it's a bit too populist, a bit too kind of, it's not intellectual enough. But I think values is really, that's what it fundamentally comes down to. And I think especially with public services, it's something we interact with in our daily lives every day. It's part of everyday life. It's something that is a values question. It's something that does feel quite personal, quite emotional. These are really significant issues. So I think actually values are an important part of this discussion.
Great, thank you, Sophia. Gina, did you come in on this question? How can we win over people? Because it's a very kind of It's a very seductive argument. I mean, it's essentially in a time where resources are constrained, we're going to come in and, do this thing, and it's going to cost a bit up front, but over time, the efficiency gains are going to be massive, and you're going to save loads of money. I mean, how does one begin to argue with that?
Can we fix the trains before we get AI? It's not a joke. I mean, it's literally, what are the trade-offs with this budget, right? In a moment where we're saying we're in a productivity hole. Okay, fine. What's the role of government in this? And for me, again, you're going to hear the dual citizen Americanism coming out. There's a lot of cheerleading that needs to happen on the part of government that is not about how do we convince people to trust us. I'm not sure that's the right way to start the sentence, right? How do we convince people to trust us to make really good choices about delivering big procurement contracts to American companies? I'm sorry. Can you play that narrative back to me? Or is the narrative, we're going to fix government and there's a lot we need to do? That's a different narrative, right? This is going to take a lot of money and a lot of time, and the benefits are not going to be paid off in the next 4.5 years. I'm sorry. Really? That seems like political, right? That's not a political win. Again, saying as somebody, who voted in the last election, the latest election. Okay, great. The Chips and Science Act in the U.S. It's gonna really, I think it's really going to pay off. Not for the Democrats in this round. So, the conversation, what is so refreshing about your report is not how do we get AI into public services. It's how do we reform public services in a way that helps fix the problem. AI can be one of those tools. It's not the tool.
Hetan, we're sort of opining on your original remarks. Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, at some level, as I said, I wasn't against the use of that kind of rhetoric, because I think actually politicians have a job of creating a narrative, and it's got to be relatively straightforward, and there's a kind of seduction to it. It's just a question of whether they can use that in a useful way to sneak in more than just the fairy dust, as it were. As I say, if you can, I mean, Kathy Sudlow's just done this extraordinary review of how you improve health data. It's not well known, but I mean, that is a really, really powerful thing. No, you can't sell that on the doorstep, as it were. But if you can use AI, we're going to use the latest technology tools to help get waiting lists down so that you can see your GP. And if in the background, to make the AI work, you implement the whole of the Sudlow review, well done. So, and the other thing, I'm on the board of the National Audit Office, and have you seen what happens to all of these projects 5 years on? So read some NAO reports and then figure out how you're not going to end up with one of our reports on your desk in a few years' time.
Very good.
And, that means you avoid the PAC as well, which is always good. So.
Absolutely. Daniel, if you haven't had to, you're still with us, so maybe the vote is coming. I know digital inclusion is a topic close to your heart. How does the digital inclusion debate relate to the AI and public services debate? What do you make of that?
So, I mean, the big thing is that we haven't had our digital inclusion strategy for a decade. So that is something that we need to grapple with. And the issues the issues 10 years ago, there's still, some of them are still the issues now. But we the landscape has shifted significantly in certain areas. And I think part of the way that we shift the narrative in these conversations around digital inclusion is that we do start having conversations about what does artificial intelligence mean when it comes to deprived areas, when it comes to different socioeconomic groups, when it comes to different demographics. And also, so that is absolutely part and parcel of the public service reform agenda. I'm working very closely with my local council and local schools, and I'm seeing the creaking digital infrastructure that we need to address. But I'm also seeing the pockets of really excellent, exciting stuff happening And believe it or not, in Weston-super-Mare, we have some amazing ed tech, AI SMEs that are doing amazing stuff that's going around the world, but it is absolutely not connected in to the work that we're doing locally or the work we're doing as a country. So, and it keeps, for me, it keeps coming back to how it's incumbent on people like me to cascade and extend the franchise of that digital knowledge and expertise, because I trust so many people in this world, but I know so many people don't, and the conflation of some of the other things that are around digital inclusion. So whether that is kind of online harms debate, or whether it's any of those other things, online harms. I have this in my head because I was at the Westminster Hall debate on online safety yesterday, and what you hear is a lot of very scary rhetoric coming from politicians still, and and I get it. I get the fear, I get the anger, and I get the upset. But the solutions aren't considered. It's like, you do something. It has to be together, and we have to be working together. So we have to figure out a way where politicians and civil society and industry and everybody else can work together. So that's why this report by you is amazing. But these conversations are really important. We should do more of these, and we should. And I will encourage my politician colleagues to come and participate as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. Gina, when I was Sophia was working on the paper, she was telling me about negotiated innovation, which was a term new to me, but seems very relevant to this debate that we're having tonight. Could you talk us through your ideas on that?
Yes, so I am finishing a book called Negotiating Innovation, which is our term for what happens when new technologies come into workplaces, right? So the model that we have of tech adoption of being decided by the CEO, the CTOs, coming into organizations and then just working is really wrong. That there is quite a bit of that socio-technical work and stitching that happens. And in the case that we looked at was a highly regulated industry in construction, right? People get sued for wrong plans, wrong designs. One of the projects we interviewed in was a hospital that was $500 million over budget and 5 years late, right? And so these projects are enormous. Any large building project is enormous. But how new automation tools came into this process wasn't a simple story that was told at the beginning of a journey, right? The beginning of the journey was, we're going to use this fairy dust, this new automating tool. It's going to make our design practices much more efficient. It's going to get us better buildings. It's going to mean shorter construction times. But it took years, right? 16 years I've been following the trajectory of this one particular tool that is a forerunner to what we call digital twin technology. And it's still not doing the thing that the visionaries said it would do, right? It said it would automate large parts of this process. That's not happened. But it has created new kinds of efficiency only because people on the ground, on the front line, the people expert in work, understood what the tool is and how to make it fit within the rules, constraints, and yes, their notions of what is ethical and legal, and in their case, safe, right? They were the ones saying, here's how we're going to adopt and innovate that tool. They negotiated that innovation. It wasn't forced on them. So I think in a world of AI, when we apply that idea, we see in so many cases, first, this takes a lot more time. It takes a lot of work. But it takes the innovation of people we're not thinking of as innovators. And why I'm so excited about this report is that you highlight public service professionals who are undervalued, burnt out, and they're the ones who are going to help get this innovation right. And if we miss out on that expertise, we don't get a second chance.
Brilliant, thank you, Gina. We're going to open it up to the floor now. Thanks for waiting so patiently. Are we going to have people going around distributing the mics? I'm looking to my events team at the back. Look at this, they appear like magic. Yeah, put your hand up. Do you want to ask a question? Who's going to be bold? First question advantage. Go on, Polly.
Hello, I'm Polly, also from Demos. Thank you so much for all being here and your brilliant contributions. One of the things that really plays on my mind is a scene I saw in Manchester last year at the NHS Confederation conference, where in the big hall there were, I think, about 24 companies. Every single one of them selling some kind of AI solution. And I'm not anti-tech. I think big tech and all tech needs to be in the conversation, be part of the solution finding. But I think one of the real risks in all of this, and one of the potentially powerful arguments for the government, is that there is a huge amount of potential waste in this. So I felt like, it was the scene was a bit like kind of gannets crawling over a kind of, the broken carcass of the NHS, to put it way too dramatically. But that's one of the risks I see in terms of the kind of costs. And I wonder whether others agree with that, and also about how that might help position this as being more strategic about the use of AI, and thoughtful in order to save money as well in the long term.
Cool, thanks, Polly. We'll take another and then we'll do them in twos. Any more for any more? Gentleman at the front, I think, was first, yeah.
Hi, hello, I'm Adam. I'm from Startup World now, but I used to work with Dan and it was me who texted him. So I got a couple of observations, but also a question. So I think there's this mistrust. So I'm really interested in the socio-technical. I've actually got a degree in technology, a degree in sociology, which in a technology environment is the first time I'll be able to say, hooray, what a me. There's quite a lot of mistrust because in politics and policy, we talk about any technology solution, but especially AI, as magic. And if you just substitute technology or AI or digital for magic, it's exactly the same understanding. So we've got a load of crap stuff, we do magic, and suddenly everything's transformed. We need to really get away from that and talk about the strategic. There's a lot of mistrust around technology. In the past, we've not done a great job about dealing with people's problems. So Nick Clegg's interesting. Nick Clegg is the only response so far from the ethical conundrum that's been put by society to technology. Facebook said, well, we hired Nick Clegg, so we've done that, right? And there's just not enough Nick Cleggs to go around, really, to solve the problem in that way. So I think we've got some... Yeah, exactly. So there's quite a lot to go. But working in the danger, so I'm working in a startup which is in the space around food poverty. There's no data in that area. One of the things, most food banks operate off a whiteboard and a marker. They don't operate off AI usable data. And actually, the places where we could do the most transformation and have the biggest impact, that's really, really hard. We can do things about digital inclusion. We work with Unboxed, who are really good at putting phones out to our pilot and all that kind of stuff. But it's really hard. And you're also part of the problem if you get it right, because you're building a platform between those who are engaged in the public task and the citizen. And actually, that is the public task. That's public sector's issue. But I think the solution is, you're right, in turning that relationship around. AI could help people to navigate government, not expect people to be able to understand which department is in charge of which bits. And you could start small, build confidence, maybe, and grow out from there.
Cool, thanks. So two kind of questions and comments there. One from Polly around the risks of waste of these solutions that are being sold, and then a comment from Adam with a sociology degree, which I'll always remember you as now, making some points around trust, but also the question of could AI be useful in helping citizens kind of navigate the complexity of government. Does anyone want to be bold? Oh, Sophia's being bold. Excellent. Over to you.
Yeah, first I'll kind of come to Polly's point. That's, I think procurement, it's one of those things, whenever I'm in a tech policy space, procurement is the thing that comes up. There definitely needs to be procurement reform, 100%. We haven't gone into it in high detail in this report because there's only so much time and space. But it is one of the things we highlight. And part of the suggestion we've kind of put as an idea out there is kind of national government taking a more active role in supporting local authorities in procurement, producing some guidance, having kind of, some kind of vetting around vendors, because there is so much out there and some of it's great and some of it's not, or there might be a lot of great stuff, but is it the right thing for the particular problem this particular service is facing? And people in these places just aren't necessarily equipped to know and to have the time to scrutinise this. There needs to be better standard setting and better scrutiny and better guidance on this. But you also don't want national government deciding for everybody exactly which digital solution they should get, because they don't necessarily know what's going on the ground and the local needs. So it's a really tricky balance, but it's absolutely an area we think is really important. I'm also going to say, so people who do social sciences are the best people. I also have a master's in sociology. So a lot of sociologists here today. I do think on the kind of point about translating and understanding government, I do think that's generative AI does get a lot of bashing from a lot of people in our circles. There are genuinely good uses for it. I do think that's one of them. I do actually think translating complicated, like kind of legalistic terminology, documents out of government, there have been some good examples of that. I think Swindon Council has this one called Simply Readable, and it's literally they just take a kind of simple generative AI application and translate kind of all these forms people have to fill out to navigate various different public services, put them into simple language so people can actually understand it, including translating into other languages. So there might not necessarily be support in a local council to translate to all the languages constituents speak, but this can be part of bridging that. So I do, again, where there's limited resources, there's opportunity. It's just always about doing it responsibly, doing it ethically, having the guardrails. I thought that was really important that the other panelists have highlighted that. And I think that's something where there's a lot that needs to be done around making sure these tools are fit for purpose and are used ethically.
Brilliant, thank you, Sophia. Dan, on the screen, whilst we've still got you before you have to run off for a vote, do you have any thoughts, reflections on any of that?
I think I dipped out a second bit, so I missed some of that, sorry. But I think on Polly's point, there's always going to be that risk. I suppose it's how we minimise the risk. And I think that is often to do with how we, it's not an easy solution, right? I mean, it's about how we have to invest in the skills of the public sector, procurement teams to be able to discern what is good and what is not, right? There's going to be, and that is, there's a perfect storm there where if you've got a tech degree or you've got competence in IT, are you going to go for suppressed pay in the public sector, or are you going to go and work for Microsoft or Google and get paid 3 times the amount? So there is that issue, but there are ways and means for us to do that, and I think there's some creativity with the idea that the state has an interventionist, almost moral imperative, actually. To be an actor in this. I think that is a very different approach to the previous government, and it's something that we can use. I think there is something about how we increase how we diversify who we are talking to as tech wonks, tech policy wonks. And I think one of the things I never quite cracked when I was at the Child Institute for IT was a meaningful conversation with organisations like the Local Government Association and those other organisations which are incredibly powerful in local communities. But I may be wrong, they may have you may all have amazing relationships with them and doing great stuff on AI in local government. I don't know. My sense is I don't think it is the case. Gina's got a mic. Is she going to tell me? No. Are you going to tell me that you are?
I'm going to tell you when you're finished. I'm not going to interrupt you.
Okay, no, other way. And that was really it. I mean, the procurement reform stuff is something that I will absolutely take away. And this is how I think these things should go. As a politician, I can take away these asks, and I want that to be a more reciprocal relationship. And I think politicians do. There is a fear, and there is a because of the amount of stuff that crosses our desks, you have to become a jack of all trades. You lose your ability to be specialist on anything, and sometimes it's the trust that we need to build to be able to be like, well, actually, I don't know this, but you do, and I trust you. So.
Brilliant, thanks, Dan. Gina.
There's a role for our universities to play here. So Sunday night's event was with AI at Cambridge, AI at Cam, which has set up a set of projects helping bridge Cambridge University researchers in AI with local government. So how can we help build that capacity? And we actually think that it's a great model because it is something that scales. Let's get it right. I love having the sociologist talk about the MVP, right? The minimum viable product. Like, let's work where we can get these things right, and then let's look to where that can scale. And if I can just bring Adam's point back in too, you made a perfect case for how and what a national data library could be doing, right? If we can simply make it easier for SMEs to obtain and understand data, public data that already exists, that's the MVP for a national data library. We can think really ambitious about what that could look like, but let's start there, where startups like yours could get better data that could help make better decisions on the things you're trying to do.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go. I've got a text message to say I've got to go and vote, and yeah, I think there's a couple. So I've really loved this. I want to do more, but I want to be in the room next time. So let's do something where we're outside of a voting cycle. But thank you, everybody. I've got to go.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Online
Bye.
voting, over to you to sort. Hetan, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thanks. I just on Polly's point. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the first question is, how many of that dozen companies actually were doing any AI? A lot of them were repackaging an algorithm and selling that. Not really AI, stuff that's been done before, because AI at the moment is the thing that sells. And another query is, if AI gets a bad press, in 5 years' time, will none of them mention AI? I mean, it's noticeable. Apple never mentions AI. It's using it everywhere. I mean, I think there's a fairly good argument for saying AI is what we call the stuff that doesn't work yet. And as soon as it works, I mean, somebody I met the other day is a professor of robotics, and she said to me, that's the same with robots. So once the washing machine works, it's a washing machine. It's not a robot. It's like, yeah. But the other thing about this is, I mean, you were sort of saying, it's too many companies, perhaps. I mean, no. But the other fear we all have at the same time is locking into big tech monopolies, right? So, actually, isn't it a good thing if we could have a functioning market? And actually, the UK has got. I mean, we heard from Dan, some SMEs doing some really great stuff. So actually, the ideal is we have a kind of functioning ecosystem of small companies and medium companies that are doing great stuff. But the problem is, how do you as a buyer know what is good or not? And then therefore this all circles back to what we've been talking about, which is how you test and evaluate good stuff so that there's a kind of threshold that you come through. And then just on the kind of Adam's questions or points, I mean, on the kind of AI can help people navigate government, I think it's a really powerful one. And I've seen examples of people using LLMs to help people claim benefits that they're entitled to. And isn't it so much more fun to use AI against the government, as it were? I mean, actually, we shouldn't just be thinking about this as let's just receive from government, as it were, right? As citizens, actually, we can be utilising these tools in other ways, as it were. Look, the tools are imperfect; they're not always great, but the benchmark we've got to use is this better than what we have right now? So.
So, hands at the ready. We've got a gentleman who's just sat in the row in front of Polly. Andrew, just in front of Polly. And we'll take...
Hi, my name's Tim Gordon, and although I work in AI and indeed used to work for Nick Clegg, I'm delighted to hear the answer, and the report is not AI is the only answer. The question I've got coming about, though, is clearly you've articulated a far more sophisticated challenge of change in terms of government. I just want to get some sense of where you think the capacity sits to actually deliver that change. We've been through decades where we've sort of seemed to have outsourced quite a lot of the thinking to strategy consulting firms. We brought in the weirdos and misfits who all seem to be getting tissue rejection at the moment. Where in you described it as a sort of, exhausted and reduced public sector. Where does the capacity sit to drive through these really big, sophisticated changes, especially given the sort of the timing challenge that Gina put on the table, which is how do you do it in time to get to the next election? Do we have time to build out those resources?
Great question from Tim. Thanks a lot. We've got a question from the online world. I don't know. Jamie.
Yeah, one question from the stream. And it's a slightly different angle. It's a question that more focuses on cybersecurity. So the question is, the public sector often deals with sensitive personal and citizen data. The use of AI increases the attack surface for cyber threats. How can government tackle this?
Okay, we'll take those two. So Tim's very good question, where does the state have capacity, given all of the challenges we've highlighted with state capacity this evening, to drive through this quite ambitious and nuanced approach to AI? And then the online question, I don't know if the question had a name, we'll just go with anonymous contributor. Doesn't matter. Question about cybersecurity and the cybersecurity risk relating to the discussion this evening. Who wants to kick us off on those? We came to you first, Sophia, so should we go this side? Who wants to go? Gina,
I'll
over
just
to
very
you.
quickly talk about cybersecurity, and I'll leave Sophia and Ben to talk about, and Hetan to talk about the capacity question. The figure I just learned, I should have known this, the UK's cybersecurity budget is getting ready to eclipse the budget that we spend on research and innovation from the UK government. We're not talking a lot about cybersecurity, but our cybersecurity systems are under continual attack. It's bad. It's really bad out there. Some of you know this institution called the British Library. Some of you know that researchers have been locked out. Some of you know, I mean, it's institution after institution after institution. It's bad. So with the rise of AI, the hope is that we can see some new tools in the toolkits for the white hats of forces of good, but we will also continue apace to see those attacks. So one of the considerations that absolutely must be taken into account is where is that balance going to be, and what are we going to be willing to invest when we put certain kinds of data together? Because it will be attacked.
Thank you, Gina. On the state capacity point, anyone want to be so
Yeah,
bold
I
as to
mean,
go for it?
it's a great question, and I mean, the short answer is there isn't that much state capacity, but I think at least you're at the right point in a political cycle, right? It's the start of a fresh government, which looks like, you know, on most measures will be here for 5 years. So I think if you're a public servant, you've got some sense of, okay, they're giving me a sense of direction. This is likely to last. It's worth kind of getting involved. And it's a government that sort of has prioritized the concept of investment in different ways, but is trying to say we're willing to forego some jam today to have some more jam tomorrow. So I think with a bad hand, all of those framing conditions are probably quite helpful. DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology, is trying to position itself as the digital heart of government. Good luck to it, but I mean, somebody kind of needs to try and drive that. So that's what they're trying to do. I mean, if you look across local government, it's in a very poor state. Again, you may have seen the NAO yesterday refused to sign off the whole of government accounts for the first time ever because of the state of local government accounts. So again, you'll have to wait for the major conurbations like London and Manchester, who have got a bit of capacity to play with this stuff, and others will have to kind of pick it up from there. And then I think your point, universities actually have got some capacity in this area and probably are underutilized in terms of being pulled in, and bits of civil society. So there's lots of people, I think, who are willing to help. And in some ways, you get the sense that government, with their kind of missions approach, what they're really struggling to crack is to say, here's a thing we would like to do. We know the state can't deliver it on our own. We need the private sector. We need civil society. We need researchers. But they don't yet have a structure which enables them to actually utilize all of that. So if they can crack that a bit, that would help.
Sophia, do you want to say anything on the state capacity question?
On
Otherwise,
state capacity, I think you should answer it.
Oh, I should answer it. No. I'm just a humble chair. I'm conscious of time, and I want us to do a final round of questions. So I'm going to not talk myself, and I'm going to open up in a very democratic demos fashion. Okay, we'll take these three hands that are up, and that's it. So we've got Charlie and Victoria, and then the gentleman at the back. Thank you.
If
I should have asked actually, just say your name, where you're from, if you want to. You don't have to.
Charlie, I'm a philosopher, but now in DSET. So grappling with some of this stuff, we're kind of encouraged quite a lot with work to kind of try and be innovative, try and use things like Copilot. And I think what I'm worried about as a philosopher maybe is kind of unintended effects and the kind of short-term versus long-term stuff we've been talking about a little bit. So I worry that part of learning to be a civil servant, which is what I've been doing, is responding to consultations, writing policy papers, doing the work of being a civil servant. And you start off at the bottom, you do it badly, you get better, and in a few years, maybe you become a much more senior civil servant and you're good at that. But I worry that introducing AI could maybe shortcut some of that, and it's not an original point, but not doing that grunt work essentially at the bottom because it's shortcutted for you by AI. I worry that in 5-10 years we might then look back and go, gosh, we've got no one who can actually do being a senior civil servant. We can spit out summaries of consultation responses, but no one's done that thinking and forced to sit there and do the work. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. As a former civil servant who wrote a lot of letters, it sounds quite appealing. But maybe you learned something in writing all those letters. Victoria, over to you.
Hi, thank you for this panel. It was really, really interesting. I'm Victoria. I work with Charlie at DSET. The National Data Library has come up a few times in this conversation. We've had a minimum viable product pitch for it. But I was wondering if you had the brief land on your desk of developing the strategy and vision for the National Data Library in the context of these kind of socio-technical approaches and not just being like, we'll put a nice term on things and it will solve everything. What would your pitch be?
Wow, great questions, very pithy. Final question, I think, was the gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Warren. I'm a SAP transformational consultant in private and public sector. I started my career actually on the privatisation project which Margaret Thatcher kicked off. We transformed utilities, British Rail, went back to Rolls-Royce Aerospace, went back to British Airways. But the very first privatisations, we transformed them in 3 years and privatised them. And I think from my experience, we don't need to be too academic on this, because one chief executive said to me, it was Rolls-Royce actually, we're not special. There's aircraft manufacturers around the world. And I think when we talk about public sector in the UK, we're talking about this is special. And it's like, there's public sector in France, Spain, Portugal. And I look at what they do, and I'm biased. So Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Spain run SAP IS public sector. Simple as that. AI is built in, it's standard. The best two councils in the country, Hampshire and Bedfordshire, what do they run wall to wall? SAP, public sector solution. What has the City of London Corporation just announced? Implementing SAP public sector solution wall to wall. And then the lady talks about Birmingham's wasteful money and transformation. Birmingham City Council redesigned Oracle with SAP business processes at £120 million and counting.
We're almost out of time.
Sorry.
So yeah, no, all good.
So I'm just saying that the solutions are there.
Yeah.
But I know it's hard to implement and people are scared to implement.
Cool, thank you. So question from Charlie on, is something lost in the automation of tasks, including those done in the civil service? Victoria's great question about what would be your pitch for the National Data Library, and comment from Warren there. So who would like to kick us off? You've got about 1.5 minutes each.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So first point, I really do think something is lost. I do think I don't use generative AI very much. You'd think I'd use it more, based on how much time I spend talking about it. But
the whole report was written by.
Yeah.
That's the big reveal of the night.
No, I do think there's real value, especially in those early years, doing things by hand, doing it yourself. It's something I'm seeing a lot of kind of educators struggling with, is kind of your students could be using generative AI, and are they actually going to learn how to critically think and engage with material if they're doing that? And I don't know quite what the solution is. Is it stick everybody in exam halls with pencils again? Maybe. But there's problems with that too. But I do think something's lost, and I don't know quite what we do about it, except advocate for, relational approaches and doing things yourself and practical experience mattering. Because I do think there's real value in those things, and I would advocate for that.
Down the panel, Gina.
To Dr. Charlie Smith, I say, congratulations. And I have a reading list for you. So there's a lot of research on this. We're seeing it in all kinds of sectors. The key thing is we have to make sure that we keep those career ladders built, and that we're not neglecting those training opportunities. Because you're absolutely right. We bring work that is seen as quote unquote grunt work, and that's absolutely vital for training people into things. We have to have a deep think on that one. That's been shown in surgery, robotic surgery. It's been shown in accountancy. How do you get consultants in consultancy firms if you don't have them training as accountants? And it's absolutely been the case in legal discovery, which used to be done by teams of lawyers, now being done automated. So we have examples, but we absolutely have to have a think on that. To Victoria, imagine something as delightful as government digital services for data, right? I think the vision is, how do we unlock that potential of data the government already has to help people outside of government use that data? There's a lot of connecting inside. That's great. That needs to be done. That'll be done as part of a national data library. But we can. For me, the starter for 10 is, how do we unlock that so that the startups and the small businesses can make sense of that? I would also have an analytics layer on that National Data Library. I don't think you get a library, which of course is the model of checking out, which is not what you're going to be doing with this data. Of course, you have that delightful analytics layer built in so that people can actually utilize public data in new ways.
Hetan, maybe a minute for you. Sorry, deflation.
Well, look, Charlie, it's great to have a philosopher in the house as well. I mean, it's been very gratifying for the British Academy, as the National Academy for Humanities and Social Sciences, to have our tribe here. Warren, partly what you're talking about comes back to what I was. I agree. There's a lot of urgent issues, and things can be made to happen. This is exactly what I was saying, that you stop calling it AI once it works, right? You didn't talk about AI there. But I think a lot of the things we were talking about are the ones that are on the cusp of working or not working. So LLMs are not quite at the rollout stage, etc. So I think that's the sort of bit that's attention. On the National Data Library, I think let's not create a new thing, but kind of make the stuff that we've already got work more effectively. So data linkage, for example, between existing data sets and longitudinal data sets, which isn't there at the moment. Missing data sets, food poverty was one that was mentioned, but others. And then, for God's sake, let's buy the postcode address file and make it open.
We'll be marching on Whitehall with that on placard soon, I'm sure. Thanks, everyone. Sorry we overran a bit. We started a bit late, but I think it's been a great discussion. Thanks to our brilliant panelists. Thanks for really good questions, and you've all got your evening and weekend reading sorted when the report is uploaded very shortly, or perhaps already has been uploaded to the Demos website. So thank you so much. Warm round of applause for yourselves and the panel.